On this episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast, we'll be talking about the Purple Rain era vault track, Katrina's Paper Dolls. And joining me on this episode is first-time guest, India. Welcome to the show, India.
Hello, Jason. It's so wonderful to be here.
Awesome. I think it's really cool because first-time guest, I'm always happy to have new guests on the show. It's something I really value, getting new perspectives, new ideas on songs. And being that it is your first time on the show, I always ask first-time guests if they can give the listeners a little bit of a background on you, who you are, as much as you want to share, and then also equally important, if not more importantly, how did you start listening to Prince? What was your entry point to becoming a Prince fan? And what is kind of like your connection to him and his music, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, of course. Okay, so to start, a little bit of background on myself. My name is India. On Twitter, I go by Miss India M. That's probably where a lot of you know me from. I've been a Prince, I like to call myself a purple person since about 2013 officially. But just a little background on myself. I am a multimedia storyteller. I'm a student at Bowie State University, getting ready to graduate. I'm a researcher. I have my own blog called I Am Funk Music Blog. I'm a writer over there. And I also have a podcast, another podcast with my co-host, Glennis. And we are Record Scratch, and we actually talk about music too. So that's a little background on myself. As far as my entry into Prince, it's 2013 or so. Artificial Age was my entry point. Now, I had heard about Prince, I live in the DMV area, so he was played like all the time, from I Want to Be Your Lover, Soft and Wet, from the 70s on to the 80s to the 90s. Prince was always being played, but before I had even moved to the DMV area, when I was a child, I had seen him on I want to say it was BET, when they used to play music videos, and they had music video segments on TV. And I remember seeing the Call My Name video. Like, I was probably, I was young, very young. And I remember seeing it. And then I remember seeing the Super Bowl and being enamored by his presence and his just being able to perform in the rain was just mind blowing to me. And I was like, how are you doing this? This is incredible, as a kid. And, he just had this aura about him that I couldn't shake. And I kind of left him alone. You see all these influential people as you grow up in life. I was very much a Michael Jackson fan at that point too. I grew up on Michael Jackson, courteous, my father, and, all of the amazing music I accumulated over my experience as a child was through my dad. And so once I got into curating my own experience, my own listening experience, and making those decisions for myself, Prince was kind of like one of the first people I got into. And I come from like a hip hop background. I come from an R&B background. So that was kind of like my arena in knowing I was born in the tri-state area. So a lot of that hip hop influence was kind of in my life. And so it was kind of, Prince was like a little bit of a departure because he did everything. And so I got into him when Artificial Age came out. And I remember I was listening to you. I don't know if they still do Music Choice. I think they do, but it's under another name now. But Music Choice used to have these R&B, like these different channels, these different outlets where you can listen to music continuously with no commercials, no nothing. And you just have it playing on TV. And my grandparents used to play it on TV like all the time when I would go to their house. And so Artificial Age, I think came on. And I was like, just in love with and Artificial Age, and I loved Afrofuturism. Like, that was kind of like my thing. I always loved like the Erykah Badu's, the George Clinton Parliament, like all of that. I was just in love with the imagery that they painted. And so Artificial Age was my entry point, and my official entry point rather. And that's kind of where it went off from there. So I got to experience Prince on Twitter. I joined Twitter because of Prince. And I got into that, and he had Princetagram, all of that stuff. And so I was just starting to get through his discography when he passed. So I think I got up to 1999, and then he passed. And so I had to just continue. And you know what? It did nothing. Of course, we were all mourning, but it did nothing but fuel me to research it more as a subject. And so as the years have gone by, I've taken on several independent like research study subjects and in terms of artists like Tupac and so on and so forth. But Prince was like my first person that I studied like thoroughly, and gratefully, you know, I was in the area of where all these books were coming out and all this information in Prince Vault was a thing. And, you know, there's so many resources at my fingertips, and the community, the Purple community really started opening up during this time. And, you know, I always watched the community from a distance. And so I was able to actually like really get involved by this point. And that's kind of where my entry point of Prince was. It's a pretty long story, but you know,
it's fascinating.
Yeah, those little stages. It starts when you really start seeing an artist, and they become repetitive in your everyday life and your everyday listening experience / viewing experience. And that's how it was kind of like a growing love, I suppose. And yeah, that's kind of where I started. And, you know, I love Prince to this day. And that's, you know, that's my guy, as people call him. It's my guy. So,
yeah, that's awesome. So like about 10 years, give or take then.
yeah.
And with so much music in his catalog, was that ever intimidating to you to have was it exciting or intimidating? A little bit of both, to have so much music to want to cover and listen to and pour over in order to like really understand your guy?
You know what? It was, I guess, because all of his albums were not entirely accessible on the internet. I loved the idea that I had to dive and dig for them. I'm really into having physical copies of things. So
Same.
the journey, right? You know, the journey, I grew up like that, like having CDs, you know, and then when I got into vinyl, it was like, oh, I need to have everything. And I love seeing like album art just blown up on this 12 by 12 or, you know, CD compact disc size, whether it's that or whether it's 12 by 12 vinyl size. And so with Prince going through his discography, I loved how I was able to go through it slowly. And, you know, I remember watching Purple Rain and crying and just feeling those emotions and, you know, being able to just track my journey by buying a piece of physical medium and a physical, like, you know, CD or vinyl. And so the length of his discography didn't bother me because I was able to intake it one by one. But once he passed, I kind of felt that initial like, man, I wish I could have got through all of this sooner, you know. And I had heard certain songs, but not like the entire album in its, you know, or the album in its entirety. And so it would be like something from Emancipation, like I'd heard that, but I hadn't heard, you know, the entire album, the entire 3-hour listening experience.
Right,
so that's why I was
like,
yeah, 3 hours.
It's a challenging listen, Emancipation. There's so much music.
Yeah, so much. And you're like, it's kind of like sensory overload in a way. So you're like, oh my gosh. So when I got to Emancipation, I was overwhelmed, and we started getting to like multiple discs, and like Sign of the Times I was okay with because it's like 2 sides, but or 2 discs, it was okay. But once you started getting to the 3 discs, I hadn't like had any listening experience besides no, Tupac is All Eyes on Me was like 2 disc. So anything past 2 disc, I was like, oh my gosh. Outside of like greatest hits, that's like Stevie Wonder's. I think Music Clarium is that more than that might be more than like, but anyway, they're like greatest hits, right? Or the Sax Vault, you know,
like box sets and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So but his discography was like, okay, well, at first I was looking at his discography, I was just amazed by it. And so I wasn't necessarily intimidated, but I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to section this out. How am I going to get to this? And I just abandoned all of that. You know, I tried to organize and figure out, and I was like, let's just go as I feel. Let it be an organic process. That's the best way to consume music, is when you feel like you're ready to move on from the next era, you do so by your own terms. And so when I felt like I was done with Purple Rain, I moved on or whatever. And I think I said before that I had got up to 1999 as far as listening to his whole. I think I was actually up to when he passed, I was up to want to say Sign of the Times. I think that I misspoke on that, actually. Yeah, it was actually up to Sign of the Times. That was the last album I had listened to prior to that. Yeah. I'm sorry, I get confused sometimes because it was a lot
No,
of
that's fine.
music. But yeah, I was actually
yeah.
up to Sign of the Times by that point. So yeah, it was I think the last album experience, yeah, was Sign of the Times, and I was moving on to Parade. And again, I had heard Kiss. Like my grandma's favorite Prince song was Kiss, so I had already heard those things, and then I started just working my way down. And then once I got into the 90s, I was just really that's kind of like one of my favorite eras, one of my favorite pockets, is because he did so much experimentation. And so once I got into that, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm sold completely.
Yeah. And if you're a fan of hip hop and R&B, the 90s is really a key
Yeah.
era as well. If you like, 90s hip hop and R&B, I mean, it has a very distinct sound. It's
Yeah.
very of the time. But if you enjoy that, Prince made a lot of music, especially in the early half of that decade, that fits right in with what was happening on the radio and MTV and other venues, BET. A lot of those songs could fit in just with a lot of different formats, radio formats and television formats. It was pretty wide ranging.
Right. Yep. So
It's all contemporary R&B, pop, hip
yeah.
hop. I mean, it was all there in those early 90s albums.
Right, exactly. And I had most of the stuff I had grown up hearing was his 80s, 70s, and 80s catalog. So it was very much funk and very, I mean, this 80s sound has like a definitive synthesizer sound. And
Hmm.
of course the Linn drum machine was what he was really primarily using during like the first half of the 80s. So I was very much into the 80s culture, and I was listening to Ready for the World, excuse me, during this time. And that their influence, so I was actually listening to all of his influences before I listened to, I mean, not his, well, all of his influence and people that were influenced by him.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and not knowing like, oh, they're connected. So once I got into it, I was like, oh my gosh, what? Melvin Riley and Prince crossed paths. They were like, they're all the way in Detroit, and he's like, not knowing like that's a small world, and understanding like the proximity, or how Sheila E. even played a role in Prince's band and so on and so forth. So this was before I even got into that. But once I started finding those little fine connections, I was like, wait, this sounds like a Prince song. Is it? And then when I would search it up, I'm like, oh my gosh, it is. What do you mean, the glamorous life? What? So A Love Bizarre, like these things I grew up listening to, I just had no idea. Manic Monday, like stuff like that. I was like, oh my gosh, I was just mind blown. So once I started, I kind of simultaneously started getting into his proteges while I was getting into him too. So it was really cool.
I think "Oh Sheila" by Ready for the World is maybe the greatest song Prince never wrote.
Yeah, right.
I mean, everybody mistakes that song as being a Prince song because it really, really copied, took influence from the music he was making from the 1999 era and Purple Rain era, and create this Minneapolis sound that had nothing to do with Prince. When usually the Minneapolis sound, there was some sort of Prince connection there somewhere.
Yeah.
Whether it was he wrote it and recorded it, or was a member of the time, like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis doing their thing with Janet Jackson.
Yep.
Or Alexander O'Neill. But yeah, Ready for the World, I distinctly remember, because I'm significantly older than you, hearing "Oh Sheila" on the radio, and I was pretty young. I was like 10 at the time, and just thinking, wow, so Prince has got a new song, huh? And I'm like, nope, it's not Prince.
We're like, what?
But yeah, so talking a little bit about Katrina's Paper Dolls, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, was off of the Purple Rain Deluxe edition that was released in 2017. Did you listen to that when it was released, or did you have to come upon this later as well?
I did. And it was crazy. That was my first like posthumous rollout. So I remember when they dropped, I think I can't remember if it was Electric Intercourse or Rose or Our Destiny. I think, was it Our Destiny that was the first? It was either one of those two that were the first. And I remember that roll. It was kind of like years ago. So my mind is kind of a little
Yeah, I'm not sure
older.
which one it was either. I remember both
Yeah.
being kind of put out there, but yeah.
Yeah, they were like around the same time. And so when those singles, I remember it just being like almost immediately after his passing, because it was like June, May, June. It was like we already have something of 2017, so we have something already coming out. We're like what, almost a year out from his passing, and I was really blown at the speed of the estate, but I also had heard that he was already working on the remasters during that time, or he had already kind of oversaw that at Paisley Park. So I wasn't thinking we were going to get any new material. And then flash forward when I heard Katrina's Papers Dolls, like when in like I think it was June when it was released. So around the time of release of Purple Rain, I was
Hmm.
just I was blown away by the amount of vault material he had related to Purple Rain. I kind of thought Purple Rain was like, okay, you made this soundtrack for this particular movie, and it was kind of capped at that. I didn't realize it was going beyond, his other works. I knew he had a lot of vault material for that, but at this point I really wasn't introduced to as much as his unreleased projects. So I was kind of just going by what was released, and I had heard a few like vaulted material, but I hadn't heard any from the Purple Rain era as much. And
Yeah, that's
so
the kind of interesting thing about Katrina's Paper Dolls is that it was recorded apparently according to Prince Vault, because I use the Prince Vault, I'm sure as you do, as kind of like
yeah,
the Prince Bible to help me understand time frames
exactly.
and eras and who was part of the recording. But this one was apparently recorded in March of '83. So this would have been about the time Prince was working on music for Purple Rain.
Yeah.
As we know, he had a lot of music done by summer of '83 when they performed. Prince and the Revolution performed at First Ave in August of that year to premiere a few different songs from that would be on the forthcoming soundtrack. But
Hmm.
it's not believed that Katrina's Paper Dolls was ever really considered for the soundtrack, but there's no proof to that. It's just kind of like a feeling, or
Hmm.
maybe like people's their gut instinct about the song. Um,
Right.
and largely, I think because it appears to be coming from, or likely is coming from, the perspective of a woman,
Hmm.
where it is believed, of course, again, that he was working on it either for what would have, at the time, in spring of '83, would have still been Vanity Six's second album,
Hmm.
because he and Vanity had not broken up, and she had not, kind of left the Prince sphere yet.
Right.
So it would have still been at that point a Vanity Six album. But then when Vanity and Prince broke up and Vanity left the project for the filming of Purple Rain, then of course that would have morphed into the Apollonia 6 album if it would have ended up anywhere. But it ended up being just put back in the vault, as so many Prince songs end up going. Just
Hmm.
wasn't right, didn't fit, whatever, whatever. And then apparently there's a potentially unreleased version from '86.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's kind of fascinating that he would have, and I'll mention why as we go through the song and what we think the lyrics are talking about and who the potential subject of the song is. But it's kind of fascinating to me that he would reach back into the vault to ask Wendy and Lisa to help him, re-record or reimagine this song, considering that it was from a very specific era and probably about a very specific person in his life that was no longer in his life. And no, I'm referring to Vanity, of course, but
Hmm.
yeah, so it's just kind of one of those interesting, like it's part of the era, I suppose, because it was written and recorded likely in '83, or at least it was recorded in '83.
And it's interesting that you say that sonically it has a Purple Rain type of feel to it, of course, but there's the idea that it wasn't intended for Purple Rain. But I don't know. I feel like I always say that it has the feeling of Purple Rain, like the kid's basement. It's kind of has that same haunting aura, but there's this childlike energy that radiates from it, sonically, in his instrumentation choice. But and then also I think with the the idea of it being from or the concept of it being from the female perspective. I don't know. Purple Rain, I mean, not Purple Rain, 1999 had a lot to do with Prince giving women more power. So I don't know. It just seemed like it was relative to the time, and it seemed like it was related in some aspects, but I don't know. It pretty much could be something that was an outtake, but I don't know. I see both sides of it, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say.
But anyway, so this song, yeah, I guess because there were songs that were thought of for Purple Rain, like Wednesday, for example, that was going to be sung by Jill Jones. So, and of course, we had songs by Apollonia 6 in the soundtrack, or, in the movie Sex Shooter, for example, where the concept of it being like a true soundtrack with recordings from multiple artists, Prince and the Revolution, The Time, Apollonia 6, Jill Jones, the idea of there being a song sung from the perspective and from the perspective of and by a woman featured in the film Purple Rain would not have been unusual. It wouldn't have been unheard of or unexpected. It just didn't end up that way. The Purple Rain soundtrack ended up only being the Prince and the Revolution songs. Songs like Wednesday by Jill Jones got scrapped, so it wasn't even in the film anymore. And at this point, in March of '83, he's got a few things in his head. I think he's got the next Vanity 6 album, which he's probably hoping to tie into this movie that he's going to be making soon. The songs that, of course, have to be made for the film and have a concept in mind. The concept kind of has to be already there in some ways before you start recording the songs, or else you're just writing songs and then hoping that a film can fit around them, as opposed to structuring songs and writing songs that fit a narrative, a film narrative. So this song, Katrina's Paper Dolls, I think it's worth going through the lyrics at this point so we can start talking specifically about what we think the story is trying to tell, and maybe not, and how it fits in with the film. It doesn't have to. We don't have to shoehorn the Purple Rain movie into the discussion of this song, but because it was slapped on the Purple Rain Deluxe edition, you kind of almost feel like you have to a little bit, like it's part of the discussion point. So the first line of the song is spoken in French, I believe, and it translates to "it sucks," according to Moonbeam Levels for You. That's the lyric sheet, the lyric website that I use. And a lot of other lyric sites for the song don't even include that opening French line that Prince speaks. Right. So I don't have any alternate or opposing theories about what this song is or what this line is, or any alternate translations of this line. So that's all I really have to go by, since I'm not a French speaker. I have to believe what it says.
I am. Like, I took French in high school. I went to the honors level, but I do think that this is pretty accurate. It pretty much translates. I know the first half is definitely it, but I'm not familiar with the I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a slang word if it truly was sucks.
Right.
And of course, not every word in alternate languages has a direct translative word that you can apply to it in English. It's kind of like, well, this is generally what it's saying. If we were to say it in English, this is what we would probably be saying to match that feeling. But just thought it'd be interesting to bring that up, because a lot of people probably skip past, or just kind of gloss over that opening line, because it is spoken in French and
in repetitive fashion too. So it's kind of like an opening statement.
Yeah, for sure. Just kind of one of those interesting things. I mean, Prince would dabble in the French language a bit during the Parade era, under the Cherry Moon, of course, but not really something he was doing a whole lot of in the early 80s.
Right.
At least not that I can remember. But then we get the first verse. Katrina makes paper dolls, one doll for every day. Her old man's been gone. Katrina makes paper dolls for every time he told her. And he repeats that for every time he told her that their love was too strong. So this opening verse, I guess, for me, that kind of opens. It's like a story song in some ways. It's a little bit like a story song. Prince is speaking from the perspective of somebody else because it's Prince singing. But of course, if this was going to be given to Vanity to sing, or Susan Moonsey to sing, or Brenda, probably would have been Vanity. Then it comes from a more of a first person perspective. But since we got the Prince version, it sounds more like a story song. He's talking about this woman named Katrina, who's the main character of the song, and she's at home making paper dolls, representing the days that her man's been gone. What we don't get from this opening verse is where he's gone to, so it's kind of up in the air. It's up to the interpretation. Where has he gone? Is he at war? Is he in prison? Is he on tour? If it's talking about somebody who's dating somebody who's a musician and a touring musician, well, that person's gone a lot, and just kind of thinking, where is this man of hers gone?
Right.
And the title, Katrina Paper Dolls, we haven't touched on it yet, but Katrina was Vanity's middle name. Right. So that is where all of the connections are really brought into the light, as in terms of where we think Prince's head was at when he was writing this song and who it was potentially intended for. It seems, it's like on the surface, it seems like it would be obvious to be about and sung by Vanity for that reason, if no other. So in this first verse, India, what are you getting out of this opening verse of the song?
I mean, I think as a filmmaker, I always, like you said, there's this vignette of this woman making paper dolls, and you kind of already get this damsel in distress, or kind of like a vintage movie, like a 1950s, 1960s movie vibe of the song. I mean, at least that's what I already kind of see visually. And then once we get into one doll for every day her old man's been gone, or so. And it just seems as though it's kind of like she's making these paper dolls to cope with the feeling of loneliness. And you get that right away. So the repetitive action of making things to cope with, these horrible emotions that Katrina is probably feeling. And then once you said, I was automatically thought about Vanity when Katrina came into the picture, right? Because her middle name, Denise's middle name was Katrina. And so I automatically thought about Prince's relationship with Vanity and how much there was so much, it was really good when it was really good, and then it was bad when it was bad. And then so their journey, I guess, as a couple in the industry. And I automatically, like when you said, I thought about being on tour. And so this opening sequence just tells me, or this opening verse tells me a lot that, it kind of just, I automatically copied and pasted to fit Vanity and Prince, if you know what I mean. So I had already had that context. So when I was initially reading over the lyrics, I was kind of just like, this fits, their story. I was kind of piecing it together. And so in the lyrics, you just kind of see that there's this hole that Katrina is trying to fill automatically, and that she's missing her lover. I mean, that's pretty clear. So that's what I gathered from the first verse, but pretty much I echo everything that you're saying. I didn't have that much to add, other than that it felt as though it was like an opening sequence to a 1950s/1960s film.
Yeah, I like that, because I also kind of get that vibe from it. And I don't know why, there's nothing in the lyrics that is so evocative of a 50s or 60s film. I think it's just the imagery that we apply to it, because it kind of speaks to more of an older style of film, an older style of narrative about, it's very old fashioned sounding, like the woman's at home waiting for a man. Like that is not a typical modern day plot. The
Right.
woman just hanging out at home waiting for her man to come home from wherever he is.
Hmm.
That's more, it just gives us more of a feeling of the way things used to be when the woman stayed home, didn't work out of the home. So they're at home more often than not, waiting
Exactly.
for their husband to come home from work or wherever he's at. And so that might be why you and I both kind of think of it in more of a classical movie or even television show context versus a modern one, because it just kind of gives us an old-fashioned feeling about where the characters are and what they're doing.
Right. And historically, I mean, like women were out in the workforce at this point. It was like commanding CEO positions, right? And so it just seems so like
Yeah,
interesting and vintage at the same time. Like this mindset of her in the ancient art of making paper dolls, that wasn't so common at that time, I don't think.
no,
So
no. Paper dolls was not in as a child in the early '80s. I can confirm paper dolls were not that popular still, because again, that is something that you do when you don't have money or the means to
exactly.
actually own real plastic dolls or fabric dolls. You
Mhm.
make paper dolls, and then you can draw and create different characters and things of that nature. But yeah, I don't remember a lot of my classmates making paper dolls when we were kids. So it's, again, that's also a very kind of old-fashioned way of creating toys or playthings.
Mhm.
The other thing I did want to mention, because I agree with you there, is once you know the context and Denise's middle name was Katrina, and
Mhm.
you kind of understand the time frame the song was written and the fact that they were still dating, it is very difficult to separate that when you're thinking
Yeah.
of the song.
Mhm.
And so those who did not know that, I don't think it changes really a whole lot. We just apply Prince and Vanity into these characters as opposed to just any random woman and any random man. So, but the thing I thought was interesting is, even if we think it's the two of them, and Prince is writing a song about their relationship at the time, this song in March of '83 was like still in the middle of the 1999 tour.
Right.
And that was the Triple Threat tour. So Vanity Six, The Time, and Prince were all on tour together.
Right.
So they would have, in theory, been
Mhm.
together throughout that tour, where there wouldn't have been the situation where she would have been at home while Prince
Mhm.
was off tour. They would have been together during the Triple Threat tour every night.
Right.
So it's
Like,
interesting because that isn't actually what was going on in March of '83. They were together all the time.
right. That just it seems, or she felt as though, Prince was recording on a daily basis, but even when at the points where she wasn't in the studio with Prince, maybe he was alluding to the fact of feeling loneliness even while they were on tour. Like that
Yeah,
could
good
have
point.
been that could have been an issue. Um,
Yeah, you could
that
feel lonely even if you're
Mhm.
with your partner, right? So
Exactly.
if your partner's not providing, the kind of support or attention to you because they're preoccupied
Yes.
creating the next big thing, the
Mhm.
thing that was going to catapult them to, world superstardom. But so yeah, no, very valid point.
Mhm.
Just because they're together doesn't mean they're, emotionally connected
Connected.
at
Yeah.
that moment.
Mhm.
The only other visual I got, and it's not the main visual, but when somebody's doing like creating something or marking something to try to establish and give themselves a sense of time passing, like she's making a doll for every day, so then when she has a pile of dolls, she knows it's been a very long time.
Uh-huh.
It kind of also gives me a visual of somebody like in solitary confinement, and you have
Yeah.
seen those movies when they're marking the wall to represent the number of days they've been in there, because
Yes.
every day is exactly the same, and they're going
Mhm.
to lose track of it and lose track of their sanity if they don't keep track of how many days. It's a
Mhm.
little bit like that, and as the song goes on, we kind of understand and maybe get a sense for Katrina's mental state as well, but I don't want to
Right.
get too far ahead of ourselves. Okay, so then moving on to the chorus, there's no way to tell her who's real and who's not. And baby, it's so much harder when your body's hot. She says that love is just a game, or so it seems, in many circles. Maybe that's what makes her world go round. Okay, so the chorus, I think, is pretty interesting. It's the language he uses here, and how he moves from kind of concept or line to line within the chorus. It touches on a few different things here. So, India, if you don't mind starting, what do you think is intriguing or interesting about the chorus? What do you get out of it?
I think it's so interesting for him to say, like, baby, it's so much harder when your body's hot. And it's honestly the idea of, you know, beautiful women and the struggle that they go through to find sincerity and love is interesting for Prince to explore. Like, I haven't, of course, later in the years he gets into it, but it almost seems as though he's able to tap in so much into the woman's mind. And I know Michael Dean had mentioned this in once we had our Prince space before, how much Prince wrote for us and for women. And it seems as though he just had such a good grip on, I don't know if this is whether it was observation or not, but understanding that, you know, sincerity is not always the number one point in a lot of objectives of men in women's lives, right? And then you get here, it's like, you know, she's like, love is just a game, or so it seems in many circles. And she seems already jaded. You know, our Katrina character here already seems jaded by love, but she's like, at the same time, this is the thing that no matter how jaded I may feel, or how difficult it is to, you know, find authenticity in love, I still live by it. I still love no matter what. And whether it's in the form of lust or whether it's in the form of, you know, an actual romantic relationship, because he doesn't make it clear here, but it's like it still makes her world. It still makes her feel. So I just thought it was so emotional, because this chorus is so emotionally compact in that way, is that there's so many layers to what he's saying. But you know, you could even go deeper than this. But I just thought that was interesting, and it puts a context on a contextualization, on the first half, and then how she sees lovers, and whether those paper dolls are actually representative of lovers instead of just, you know, we had a question of what those paper dolls represent, and so right here it kind of puts that in stone, I feel.
Mm-hmm. No, great observation. I'm totally with you on that. The first two lines, there's no way to tell her who's real and who's not. Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting, because I think it could be interpreted two different ways. Mm-hmm. There's the way that you can interpret it that implies maybe her grip on reality is slipping. Mm-hmm. You know, she can't really tell who's real and who's not. I mean, if you think about that just from the literal standpoints, she may be, like I said, losing her ability to tell, you know, what's real and what's within her imagination. Like when she's making these paper dolls, are these paper dolls real? Are they, you know, in her mind, are they turning into real people? Mm-hmm. And you kind of question, you know, the sanity of the person who's making these paper dolls day after day after day. But then you can also think of it, so who's real and who's not? Like, who's real? Like, who's for real, as opposed to who's, you know, who's there in person and who's not. Like, who's a real person, who's a genuine person that they can rely on, and who's not. But, you know, going back to as it flashes forward through the chorus, love is just a game. So if people are playing games with her, maybe she's thinking her man's playing games with her. Maybe there's other suitors that are trying to hone in, knowing that she's alone. And yes, she's trying to hold off for the person that she's in love with. But, you know, are these people that are coming around asking her how she's doing, are they for real? Do they really care about her, or are they just trying to get with her because she's hot? Mm-hmm. You know, which is basically said right there in the next couple of lines. Mm-hmm. So much harder when your body's hot. So maybe she's getting a lot more attention than she wants because she's a beautiful woman. and it's harder for her to resist the temptations that are being presented to her as a lonely woman trying to hold out for the person that she loves who's absent.
And the attention that she's receiving is like, I guess in this instance, I think the attention is probably in the forefront, like the idea of, well, who's real and who's not, because your exterior looks amazing, but internally she could be, as we see, like there's so much turmoil that she's going through of missing this her old man, and quote unquote, right? Which is like the lover that her true heart is probably going towards, but all of these other people seem as though they're passing time and feeding into her and pouring into her, even though the old man above that has been gone for so long is not giving to her. So it's like she's the reality of her situation is, it seems as though she's kind of how could I put this? If I try to find a great way to word this, but it seems like her reality again is like jaded by the former interactions she had, or the interaction she's still having with the man that she's really dedicated towards. But it just seems as though she's going to seek attention elsewhere when it's not given. And so that idea of there's no way to tell her who's real and who's not, it's like, what is real? Because the dude, I always say, like, the dude that she's been dealing with formerly is like, has been playing probably tons of mind games on her. And so she doesn't have a strong grip on reality in terms of love, Yeah.
The chorus, I think, is probably the deepest part of the song. The verses are pretty, they're basic, bare bones, narrative kind of, here's what's happening, here's what she's doing. But the chorus is what really gives us a bit more meat, I think, in terms of how to think of the song and where the song is going and what Prince is trying to say with it. So, yeah, I like the chorus quite a bit. The second verse, if we're ready to move on, do you have anything else to talk about with the chorus?
No, I think when we were talking about the first verse and we were talking about tallies and how it kind of relates to like, oh, I'm counting the days, right? It's like, are these days reality now? Like, how many days? Is it as many days as it she's like, for $1 for every day? How many days though? It's kind of like, which days are just the feeling of loneliness and which days are the actual reality of loneliness?
Yeah. We really don't have a sense for that at all. Prince doesn't give that to us. So the second verse, Katrina makes paper dolls. They all look the same. They play the same games. Katrina makes paper dolls. It's better than being lonely. And love will make you lonely in the eyes of this dame. So again, the paper dolls seem to be stand-ins for men. That's kind of the implication here is, they're basically a metaphor for men. And they all look the same. They all play the same games. So she, again, going back to your comment about her being a bit jaded, that's certainly something somebody who's jaded by love would say. All the guys are the same. Men are all the same. They just want to play games. They just want this. They just want that. And, Katrina, when Prince wrote the song, of course, he's writing it from the perspective of a woman. We have to assume that's what's happening here. Now, is he saying that or she's saying that? I don't know. But yeah, I kind of get the impression that this is what Katrina's thinking.
Yeah.
It doesn't say Katrina thinks they all look the same and they all play the same games. It just says they all look the same. They all play the same games. So I get the sense that is like what her perspective is on men at this time, even though she's talking about dolls. So she's making the dolls and all the dolls look the same. But again, I feel, and you can tell me if you disagree, but I feel like that at this point she's talking about men, not actual dolls.
Yeah. Her history with, whether they're meaningless or well, in this case, I would say it's meaningless interactions, since they're just blank paper dolls to assume
good
time to pass, until she can get to her old man. And I think Yeah, I think you're on track there, because her interior, like, I just think that's her inner thoughts right there.
Yeah.
Even though he's saying they, right there, it's just like a transition into, okay, Katrina makes paper dolls, and then we get into her brain as far as what she's thinking.
Yep. It's her inner monologue. Yep. Exactly.
Exactly. Yep. Like a play.
Better than being lonely, right? And so
Exactly.
this is where it goes back to, I think, what we were talking about with potential suitors coming around, or people that she's just filling the time with.
Mm-hmm.
Even though all of these men are, they don't stimulate her mentally, emotionally, but it's better than being lonely. And she's
Mm-hmm.
kind of taken that approach that even though she sees them for what they are, game players, not people that she can tell are for real or not,
Mm-hmm.
it's still better than being lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And love will make you lonely in the eyes of this dame. So again, I think that's because she's actually in love with
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's not there. That's why she's lonely. She's not lonely because I don't think she's lonely because she needs somebody to fill her time and her and in the whatever void she feels in her life.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's lonely because she's experienced real love,
Right.
and she doesn't have it anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
now she's missing that and has grown lonely because of that. That's kind of what I get. I don't know. Do you get something different or something else?
No, I get the exact same sentiment from that. I think it's like, right? I think in Love Would Make You Lonely, in the eyes of this dame, that's when Prince brings you out of like Katrina's monologue, so to speak. And so you're able to have that realization, well, you know, the paper dolls are just, again, meaningless interactions in time, like, I guess, a way to make time pass to fill this void for the man that she truly wants, or the man that she's experienced love with. And so it's just kind of everything, once you experience the top, or the apex of love, everything else is just, I guess you could say, kind of just is
Well, it's like less
normal.
than,
Yeah, it's like it's normal. It's like it's nothing that it's, and I don't want to say meaningless, because they probably have some type of meaning, but it's just like I'm trying to find a great word for it, but it's like, yeah, it's just normal. It's like it is what it is. So I guess Katrina has experienced this apex of love, and she feels as though it's better to feel this gaping hole, or this or to wait out. I don't know if she's waiting out for whomever the guy is, but to feel this emptiness than to just pass time. So, or to make paper dolls rather than to feel the loneliness. So, like, again, I think it's kind of like half and half of her experiencing this high level of love, and maybe this is her only experience with love that makes it the apex, but it also could be just her passing time, that the idea of passing time as well. So I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of think of it as, somebody who is trying to watch their weight or watch what they eat. They'll
Mm-hmm.
buy substitutes for things that are maybe less good for you, like sugar substitutes, or like low fat this, low fat that, no fat this. And so you eat it and you're like, okay, it kind of gives me the same experience, but what it really does is makes you miss the version that you're not supposed to have, or you can't have,
Yeah.
or you shouldn't have. And
Doesn't
like,
taste as good.
yeah, so she's had real love,
Yeah.
as we have to assume based off of how the lyrics are presented to us.
Mm-hmm.
And now she's substituting real love with these paper doll men that
Mm-hmm.
all look the same and all play the same games. And what that really does is just make her miss the real love even more. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's reiterating the point you were making, and just just like how I'm thinking of it. But it's ultimately we're saying the same thing. We think
Yeah.
that ultimately the same concept is being presented to us here by Prince. And I think it's funny because a song written by Prince potentially about his girlfriend missing him. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, Prince is going to paint his his love as being the ultimate. Like, she
Right.
misses me so much, and I'm the best, but and all these other guys that she might be seeing behind my back, because
They don't compare to me. Nothing
exactly.
compares to me.
Like, he's definitely painting his love and who he is as being
Agree.
somebody and
Yeah.
something that is worth missing, and something that
Mhm.
she definitely can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the, the benefit of being the storytellers. You get to tell the story however you want. So
Yeah.
if Vanity wants to write a different story about their relationship, she's certainly welcome to do so. And she probably did in some of her solo stuff. I haven't pored over her solo material quite as in depth as I have done Prince's music, but
With Vanny, I always look at Samuel like as a rebuttal from, I think it's Wild Animal. You know, it's like, Samuel, this is your lover calling, that song.
oh
Um,
yeah,
I don't know, I feel like, because she refers to paper dolls in that song. So it's probably one of my favorite Vanity solo works. But it's just like, I think she sings like, if you sing to me, will you ring my doorbell? And I always thought that was a direct call to end the loneliness, and probably like, there's talks of promiscuity in here. So like, I always felt like, okay, well, that means like, if my old man comes around, you know, this will end my loneliness. And then it's a whole, I know, like, ring my bell is a whole reference to Anita Ward's, like, you can ring my bell, like that has a sexual undertone to it. So
for
I
sure.
always thought that there was, some type of, I don't know if she heard this song, or them being so spiritually connected that they kind of were able to create some similar body of work in that way. But I always thought that was like a rebuttal. I don't know. It just seemed like she
I,
was singing to Prince in that as well.
the evidence seems pretty strong to me, India. I think I'd be very surprised if she had not heard this song
Yeah.
and was a little bit like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, you think that you're all that, and that I'm this way when you're not around. And again, like you said, like, they had a very volatile relationship. I think that's well
Exactly.
documented. They
Yeah.
were hot and cold. There's no, I don't think anybody has any ideas that they were always monogamous with each other while they were
Right.
together.
Hmm.
So if she heard this song, she's like, okay, well, that's what you think, but here's what I think. And Wild Animal only came out, I think, a year later, like in '84.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and knowing that, it's interesting if she did write that song as a rebuttal to a song
Hmm.
that was never released, because the only person who really is going to hear it and glean that level of specificity and personal touch to it would be Prince.
Exactly. And that's why I was like, I think it was a subtle, yet if you know type situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
and there's no scenario where I don't imagine Prince listened to Vanity's solo music.
Yeah, no, he definitely had to. And I'm like, she was around pretty much for, again, the Triple Threat tour. So that for him to make a song about her, and for her not to hear it, is kind of like that would be mind blowing. But I'm pretty sure he had to know something,
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the chorus is repeated, and it's identical to what we've already talked about. So there's really nothing more to say there. And then he does another repeat of basically the second verse, where he says, Katrina makes paper dolls. It's better than being lonely. Love will make you lonely in the eyes of this dame. They're all just paper dolls. He kind of starts to scat a little bit and ad lib towards the end of the song. The only like newish line is towards the end during the outro. It says, "Love will make you horny."
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything deep about that line other than just
No,
Prince being Prince, but unless you have something.
no, I just think that's a confirmation of what, like, the idea of what the paper dolls are. Like, they're definitely men. So it just seems it. We already talked about how paper dolls are probably a representation of her sexual history with meaningless encounters. So I just think that was probably like the most, maybe a confirmation, if anything, about what
Mhm.
those paper dolls mean or are. And yeah, that's kind of all I had for that. There's nothing really special like to add to the fact. It's pretty
Agreed. I think we definitely dug deeper into this song than I'd ever dug into this song before. I mean, when it's on the Purple Rain Deluxe edition, all the vault tracks on that release, there's so many really important, and I'm not using air quotes, important songs, because it's hard to say that these songs were important when they were unreleased, but Electric Intercourse, important. Dance Electric, important. We Can Fuck, important.
Yeah.
Our Destiny, Roadhouse Garden. Like, these are all well-known vault songs before they were released in 2017. I mean, Katrina's Paper Dolls was known. I mean, it was selected as for inclusion on that Crystal Ball 2 would have been released based off of the voting at the first Prince celebration in 2000. But of course, as we know, Crystal Ball 2 never came to fruition. So this song never saw the light of day during Prince's lifetime. But I think this song doesn't get the same. The song isn't put on a pedestal in the way that some of those other songs that I cited are. I don't think personally, but I think there's some. I think there's something. There's some depth here, right?
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that, you know, whether it was it was the estate decision to like circle back to this after the like years after the initial voting for it to be included on Crystal Ball, but that honestly could have been the definitive, you know, decision to include it on Purple Rain Deluxe is because it was voted once before. So I don't know, maybe that is what had to do with it, but you know, it's kind of here, you know, it seems pretty much of a straightforward song, but there is so much to unpack, like we said, within the lyrics. I think there's much to read into. You have to be careful because you can read into this, but you could also kind of take it as is. And so I always want to be cautious because sometimes I have the tendency to overanalyze and I'll be like, what is this subtle message, you know? So maybe there was some depth here, and maybe there, you know, he could have basically just used her. He was like, she was probably the first person on his mind, and so he used her middle name as, you know, a story, as a character in his story that he wanted to tell. This could very well be about somebody else, but
absolutely,
you know, we never know. But I don't know. There's so many similarities, and then there's the rebuttal. I feel, my personal opinion is that there's a rebuttal with Samuel. But, you know, it's all up to interpretation for sure.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. This is the opinion of two people. You're absolutely right. He could have just pulled Katrina out of thin air, knowing that it was, you know, his girlfriend's middle name, but it might have nothing to do with Vanity. Just could be a song. Maybe he was thinking like this would be a subplot in the film about a woman. Like, you know, like Jill Jones's character is somebody who pines over the kid throughout the film. They never date. She just has a crush on him, and it's unrequited. And so maybe this is kind of an example of this person's psychosis of being, you know, jilted, rejected, not being, you know, being ignored, not being taken seriously as a potential mate. Or it could have been just like, okay, well, the next Vanity 6 album, I want to get that out here around the same time as I release Purple Rain. So let me start working on songs to be sung by a woman. I mean, we don't know, but you're right. This is two people's interpretation. We seem to be on the same page. So whether or not that means anything, I don't know, but it doesn't mean that this is a definitive, this is what the song means, period. We don't really know.
I also think it's important that we, like, I was doing research prior to this episode, and one of my favorite blog, you know, Prince blogs, DMSR, Zach, he had...
Yep, shout out to Zach Hoskins.
Right. So he had wrote, you know, this is like Prince's projection at its greatest level. And I'm like, you know, I do see it. I mean, like, Prince could have definitely taken this on his own life as on in a female character, in a female form. And even like, I know Prince always mentioned that he saw a lot of himself in Vanity, and they were kind of like reflections of one another. So that also takes on like a different layer. It's like, well, is Prince talking about himself, but just in the eyes or the point of view or perspective of Vanity, or through Vanity? Like there's also that layer. It's so interesting. Like this is a simple, like we said, this is a simpler song, out of all of the previous Purple Rain Deluxe songs you mentioned. It does have a bit more bones than meat, but I feel as though that you could take it and run with it. And there's so many, like I said, there's so many layers to peel back. And just as you keep digging, there's a little bit more meat there. There's a little bit more, it's not always black and white. So I thought that was just interesting to bring up, whether that has any significance or not, we could see. But
Yep, agreed. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that we have done a wonderful job breaking the song down, India. So I think this will be a good time to kind of conclude the episode, unless you have any final thoughts.
No,
we covered it all.
Yeah, I think we covered it all. That was we probably covered more than we needed to.
All and then some.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so then going back to you. Do you mind sharing, again, your social media links or anything that you want to share with the listener, where they can find you and maybe find what you're doing?
Of course. I'm on Twitter. I am at Planet India M on Twitter. On Instagram, I am at India Soulful Haze. And I also have my blog page, which you can follow. That is I Am Funk Music on Instagram. I'm working on getting a Twitter for that, but that is to be announced. And I'm also on Medium. I am at I Am Funk Music on Medium. And then also my podcast is Record Scratch, so you can follow us on Twitter over there. And we have Prince segments too, in which we released a tribute to Prince on the 7th anniversary of his passing, but we have more segments to come. We've actually been recording, so they will be out soon, and hopefully by June we'll get some things to you guys. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my social media and pages. And just look out. I always actively write Prince related articles or post Prince related content on all of my platforms, including Record Scratch, which is a shared platform between me and my friend Glenn, my journalist friend Glenn. So yeah, just be on the lookout.
Will do. I will make sure to include links to those in the show notes for people who are looking to find you. And I want to thank you very much, India, for joining me on this episode. It's been a pleasure having you on. And hopefully you enjoyed your time.
I did. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was such a pleasure to talk with you. I am actually a huge fan of this podcast as well. So I love having a space where we can break down Prince lyrics. That's just amazing. So thank you so much for inviting me.
We geek out here, that's for sure.
yeah. I feel at home.
It's a safe space to geek out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And this has been the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger. You can find the show at pressrewind.net. I also am on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Links will be in the show notes if you aren't already following the show there. And until next time, thank you very much, and goodbye.